Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Sunday Matinee. We're on episode 35. Last episode, we talked about one big film from 2021. Of course, that was Spider-Man No Way Home. Now, we're going to dive into essentially what we thought about the year as a whole. But before we get started, we have news. And of course, I'm going to introduce the panel. This week, joining me, once again, for the first time since I believe the Justice League chat is Gary Chambers. Gary, welcome back. It's been way too long.
Thanks, Ben. Hey, everybody.
All right, so let's just jump right into the news here. I wish Sarah was here for this bit of news because I know she'd be ecstatic. Scream 6 has got the green light at Paramount and Spyglass. Production is set to begin this summer with directors Matt Bettinelli-Olpin and Tyler Gillette returning to direct. And the screenwriters James Vanderbilt and Guy Busick are also coming back. Scream 5 was kind of a surprise this year, you know. Came out of nowhere, got pretty good reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, and was the first film to dethrone No Way Home at the box office. I think that is immediately a good sign for the franchise and a good enough reason to greenlight another sequel. What do you think, Gary?
I don't see any reason not to. There is a really good reason why this kind of film, this genre, is lapped up by the public. And while it's popcorn fodder for the masses, bring it on. What better time than now for that? Yes.
Yep, they were hibernating for a long time after Scream 3 and 4 didn't perform particularly well, but
for good reason.
Yeah. But, you know, like the recent Halloween reboots, sometimes some franchises do have that staying power and the ability to make a huge comeback. So good for them. All right. Speaking of, we're going to talk a little bit about what we're looking forward to in 2022, close to the end of the chat. But in the news, Netflix revealed a huge lineup for 2022, including at the very end of their little reel, the first tease of Rian Johnson's Knives Out 2, which of that entire lineup is easily my most anticipated release from Netflix this year. Again, I just want to express how utterly disappointed I am that this is a Netflix exclusive, meaning it is very likely, unless they do an Oscar push, not going to be seen on big screens and probably is not going to get a home video release, as that has been the trend for most Netflix films over the last few years. Other highlights included Enola Holmes 2. I'm sure a lot of fans of that film will be excited. The Gray Man from the Russo brothers with Ryan Gosling and Chris Evans. And Ryan Reynolds. Is it? Yeah, I can't remember if it's Ryan Reynolds. The Adam Project. I think that's the Ryan Reynolds film. Gary, is there anything from the Netflix lineup that you're excited for?
Well, I was wondering, The Lost Daughter, which was just recently released, that was an Olivia Colman vehicle that was released on Netflix. Now, this is one of those pictures that would be really worthy of an Oscar buzz. So since this kind of inserts beautifully into what you were just talking about, was that film released to the big screen before the Oscars and Golden Globe nominations were released?
I don't know. If it was, I don't think it was released anywhere in our neck of the woods.
Yeah.
Except maybe the Grand, but I don't, going to IMDb and Fandango is not the best way to find out what's playing at those smaller houses all the time.
That's true. And it seems like where we are, it's the Grand Cinema or bust. And we get maybe a weekend, possibly two in the more popular ones. But the films that are skirting the festivals, we don't really see a whole lot of those here. So we have to go out and seek those out usually in Seattle.
One of the few exceptions to that Netflix rule, I'm pretty sure The Irishman got a home video release because it got a huge Oscar push. And I think Criterion ended up releasing it, which makes absolute sense.
And the name, of course, Scorsese. Yeah. Whatever he wants, Scorsese gets.
Yep. And we'll jump in to talk a little bit about streaming versus screening a little bit later. But for now, let's elaborate on a little bit of what we talked about last week. Tom Holland has clarified some of the Spider-Man rumors of late, saying that Spider-Man's future isn't necessarily set in stone. There was this immediate rumor after No Way Home released that Sony and Marvel had already planned a new trilogy of Spider-Man films with Tom Holland. That is not necessarily the case, but Tom Holland says there should be a future for Peter Parker in the MCU, which makes sense given, without saying too much, where No Way Home leaves off. You know, he still has a place amongst those heroes.
He's got skin in this game. Yeah, absolutely. And quite frankly, if you strip away all of the hyperbole and get right down to it, it's not about story. It's about how much money can Tom Holland bank in the next so many years before he turns that auspicious 30 and he's too old to do Spider-Man. And I'm alluding, of course, to his recent quote, but it was funny because on the heels of that that very well asserted statement, I don't want to be doing Spider-Man when I'm 30, but I'll renegotiate for another 3 films. Just funny.
Well, you know, given his history in the comic books, I do not have a problem with a 30-year-old Peter Parker.
Not at all.
You know, as long as, you know, he could just eventually sort of have to become that Tony Stark mentor-like character once he hits a certain age.
Yes.
Speaking of Marvel, we already knew that Loki season 2 was happening, and now we know that it is scheduled to begin production this summer. We're pretty sure that Tom Hiddleston is coming back. I mean, come on. But so far, the only actor to have officially announced their return to the series is Gugu Mbatha-Raw, confirmed to return as Judge Ravonna Renslayer. I think it's a sure bet we're going to see almost every character who survived Loki season 2 come back. I mean, why not? That's why we liked the show so much.
Mm-hmm. It's such an irreverent take on the character and the universe, which soon to be the multiverse, that it would seem a huge miss for Tom to not insert himself in that particular role once again. He is that role. And in fact, if you break it down even further, who could take up the mantle of any of these characters? They are so well embodied by the actors that inhabit them for the length that they do. And yes, I understand they're borrowing these characters for a time being, but for the last 13 years now, it's been the same actors with the lone exception of Spider-Man. Would somebody else be accepted as Tony Stark or any of the other Marvel characters that we've come to know as the actor's visage?
Exactly. Unless you're talking, of course, about variants. That is a possibility that we could be looking into.
Yeah.
Especially after some of those wild cameos we got in Loki from some really great actors playing and some really great alligators.
So much fun. I can't actually wait to go back and before the second season, presuming that it actually hits, and just binge the entire series again, just to make sure that all of those pieces, and there are so many, fall into place. And what's really interesting is that, especially as they tie into the films, revisits are almost mandatory because there are so many pieces, parts that come from elsewhere to make the story complete.
So last bit of news, this just broke this morning. We're this morning, Monday, February 7th. Village Roadshow Pictures is suing Warner Brothers over the release of The Matrix Resurrections on HBO Max. Now, I think this is important to bring up because it's kind of a pattern that we saw in 2021 with these problems. First, it was Legendary, who didn't sue Warner Brothers, but they did express grievances over Warner Brothers releasing both Godzilla vs. Kong and Dune on HBO Max without consulting them first. Fortunately, that never escalated into legal action. And this all actually happened before both of those films were even released. So Legendary kind of took a proactive step, in my opinion. Scarlett Johansson sued Disney over the release of Black Widow on Disney Plus. And I completely understand where she's coming from because, one, she's just one person who's due a paycheck. And also, Disney was there was never really the sense that Disney knew whether or not Black Widow would be going to Disney Plus day and date with theatrical releases. So it was always a question of what if with Disney. In this case, however, and I mean, it does come down to money in every case, but this more than any of them, I think, comes down to money, because Matrix, unlike those other films, basically bombed at the box office. And I see this more as Village Roadshow reacting to the poor box office performance, because part of their suit is that they claim that they were not properly informed about Matrix Resurrections coming to HBO. They had a whole year to discuss this problem with Warner Brothers. Like Legendary, only had a few months to do this, to clean up house before Godzilla versus Kong came out.
Mm-hmm.
They had a year to talk to Warner Brothers about this and didn't, and played the wait and see game to see if Matrix would either be a massive success for them or a failure. Because if it was a success in the theaters, this wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
And I think there's plenty of other factors that go into why The Matrix bombed at the box office. First and foremost, every other movie that was released in December after No Way Home was destined to be hit hard. No movie was going to be nearly as successful, or two, it released in theaters as the Omicron numbers were really starting to ramp up. SpiderMan hit the week before, and it was when we were kind of hearing that Omicron was a thing, but it had the benefit of we weren't back at that sort of like don't go out of the house phase yet. It's very unfortunate. And also, if I'm being perfectly honest, The Matrix does not have the goodwill that other franchises have. Everyone is entitled to their opinion. Mine is The Matrix Revolutions was awful. And
you buried the lead.
My interest in a fourth film was already incredibly lacking.
Okay,
like, how do you save this?
I'll layer this in then. I think there's a fourth element about this that has not yet been mentioned, but I think it is a thumb on the pulse of the community, a thumb on the pulse of America, really. And that is The Matrix asked America to think. Now, it's not a slight, I promise, it's not a slight, in the sense that it is a deeply philosophical film. In a film like Star Wars, you can take it at the superficial popcorn level and it's TIE fighters and Darth Vader, but strip away some of the layers and it's an exercise in studying moral philosophy. And if you go into The Matrix, it can dive even deeper. If you really strip away a lot of the layers, it goes into a lot of ethereal realms in which a lot of these philosophies are derived and then laid out for you in a two-dimensional picture. And gosh darn it, Americans are just not ready to be deep thinkers right now. We deep think at work. We deep think with our families. How are we going to get out of this situation? And to prognosticate our future as a species or alternative realities in such a dour way as The Matrix presents, it's entertaining, but it is kind of an apocalyptic future when you look at it, as opposed to the crisp, bright colors of some of the features that have been more successful, like Encanto. Americans don't really want to think right now. We've been asked to deal with the pandemic. We've been tasked to get new jobs and better pay, even though the economic circumstances doesn't necessarily inform that. And we're just trying to muddle through. We're not really in the mood, I think, holistically, to take a deep dive into a philosophical film. A funny, scary film like Scream? Absolutely. Something ebullient and joy-filled and music-filled like Encanto? Certainly. And Spider-Man is no different. It is the exact elixir that we needed at the right time.
I think it's also important to remember that in as high regard as we tend to hold the first Matrix, it wasn't a huge success when it first released to theaters. This is a movie that opened about a month before The Phantom Menace. Mm-hmm. And it was highly regarded by critics and by everyone who saw it. But The Matrix didn't become a huge until it came to DVD. That's
And that
sort
was
of
one of
where
those DVD releases that was a really rich experience for DVDs in 1999 before the interactivity was really introduced. So that was one of the first DVDs that did that with the White Rabbit bonus features and so forth.
So that's it for the news. Before we jump into the main topic, I just want to ask, what have we been watching lately? And this is sort of apart from what we're about to talk about, like just, going back to revisit lost gems, or what are we watching on Netflix, etc., that kind of thing. I'll just throw one out there. I finally caught up on Archer. Got to the end of where they're at now. It was a beautiful send-off for Jessica Walter, who sadly passed away last year. She had finished filming or recording all of her dialogue for the season, and they were able to write it in such a way that they just gave her a nice send-off. So that was just really nice, and it's a fun show to just get caught up on before they release the next season, coming up here sometime in the spring, I think.
How many seasons is that in now?
I believe they're going into their 13th this year.
Oh my gosh, it's been around for a while.
It has. They have gotten to the point where they've sort of shortened the seasons. They're only about 8 episodes a piece now for the last couple seasons, as opposed to going into like 13 or 14, which is fine. As long as the quality stays good.
And sometimes one would argue that a shortened season, these, I think they're calling them mini series, but a different definition of a mini series, instead of being 26, then 22, and then 23, now 13 or 10, 6 to 8, not necessarily the norm, but for new shows, just trying to find a footing, trying to find an audience, what a great gateway. And as far as I'm concerned, I would rather see a very well-written 6-episode arc than a middling 13 or 23 episode season. It just doesn't make sense. Give me fewer episodes, higher quality, better production values. And that segues into what I'm watching, which is Star Trek Discovery for TV. That's pretty much the thing right now. I absolutely adore that series. I think we've got a lot of potential coming up with Picard getting online for season 2 and season 3 coming up beyond that. And I've been taking a bit of a dive into some things that are nostalgic from my childhood. And this would be really for folks that are my age or better. I found an older DVD of The Secrets of Isis. Do you remember that CBS series,
Nope.
Shazam and Isis Hour on CBS in 1974 to 77, somewhere in there? I mean, I was a really young kid and you were just a sparkle in your mother's eye, Ben. But it'll be interesting to revisit that, because I find that some series that you revisit as an adult that you enjoyed as a kid, it may be nostalgic for about 5 seconds, and you go, oh my God, this is awful. But then there are some series that will really surprise you, like Quantum Leap, for example. God, that show holds up well. But that's Dean Stockwell and Scott Bakula for you. I mean, those two actors working together. Anyway, that's what I'm watching right now. Star Trek Discovery for the new stuff, and The Secrets of Isis and Shazam for some things back in the day.
I've also been watching, I just wanted to put it on for doing housework the other day, Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, which still holds up. Still my favorite of the films. Brad Bird really, I mean, J.J. Abrams really was a great pivot with 3 to really get the series on track, but Brad Bird really cemented that Mission Impossible was a franchise that was there to compete with Bond and Bourne.
Yeah.
And I'm glad it's kept going. I'm disappointed that it's been delayed. The 7 and 8 films have been delayed again, but I get it.
Yeah, give Tom Cruise a chance to get back in shape.
Yep. I also watched the entirety of Murderville on Netflix, which just released last week. It's only 6 episodes. They're about half an hour a piece. The whole concept is it's Will Arnett as a homicide detective with a special guest star every week, and the guest star does not get a script. They have to improvise their way through the entire mystery and guess who the killer is at the end of the show. They've had who do they have? They've had Ken Jeong, Kumail Nanjiani, Marshawn Lynch was on an
Oh,
episode.
okay.
For those of you outside the world of, we're stuck in the world of cinema. Marshawn Lynch, former running back for the Seattle Seahawks. So yeah, football player. Not a lot of acting experience, though he was also on an episode of Brooklyn Nine-Nine a while back.
Conan O'Brien, I
So,
see, is on this show.
and
Okay.
yes, Conan. Yeah. So it's fun. It's not the most deep thing, but and
As we discussed, we don't need deep thinking right now
yep.
necessarily. Oh, heavens.
And of course, and I won't talk about these too much because I'm saving them for future episodes. I am keeping up on the Book of Boba Fett.
Yes.
And Peacemaker.
Yes.
And
I didn't want to blow any potential spoilers out there by even mentioning those titles, but those are definitely either being watched, Boba Fett, or Peacemaker coming up, most definitely. Because oh my gosh, what an introduction to him in the Suicide Squad, which was one of my favorite movies from last year. He's sitting up in that that classroom theater with his questions. Perfect.
Yep. Oh yeah, I'll say this: Peacemaker's been a blast, and I think if you enjoyed the Suicide Squad, watch Peacemaker, and if you have HBO Max, watch Peacemaker. All right, 2021, navigating the new normal in film and television. So we spent a lot of time in 2021 talking about when are we going back to cinemas? How's it going to work? What's going to be the first movie to successfully get an audience? And well, it just sort of escalated as the entire year went on. I mean, I, for one, didn't go back to see anything at a cinema until I was fully vaccinated in the spring. So I missed a lot, even though they weren't open. Even though some theaters weren't even open yet, I still missed a lot early on. Like, I didn't see Godzilla versus Kong on a big screen, which is, I think, a shame. But I think I got to catch most of the movies on the big screen that I wanted to. I don't know if that's the same story for you. Gary, did you ever go back to the cinema last year?
And it's a really good thing that I'm on this show this week, because the answer is no. And a rather emphatic one, not because of any political reasons, which we will gleefully sidestep today, but the reality is we were trying to protect the house from COVID, and we were successful for a very long time until the Omicron variant kicked in. And as everyone knows, it's so easy to catch that my spouse succumbed to it. And we've so far spent about the vast majority of a month in either isolation or pseudo-isolation. So getting out in the last 9 months to protect the house, overall, I've been trying to keep things as close to home as I can. And that includes my movie viewing. So everything that I've seen so far this year in 2021, thus far, now we're in 2022. And so far 2022, everything has been in my home theater. Now that informed actually making some upgrades, because there are some elements about the theater going experience that I do miss very much. The bigger screen, the surround sound, not a guarantee, but a higher odds that you're going to get a better aural experience than you get at home. These are things that you can only get in the theater, but I kept it at home on purpose just to keep the family safe.
And I absolutely can't fault you for that. Nope. I was very fortunate to, and I figured out a trick, and I brought this up a couple times on the show, especially recently.
Yeah, please do.
If you want to go to a movie theater, one of the things you can do is hop on a Fandango app, because they will show you what seats are taken in upcoming shows. So, I went to a packed theater the first time to see SpiderMan. At the time, it was still that sort of sense of, okay, we don't have a new variant. And then it hit, of course. But a couple weeks ago, I went and saw Nightmare Alley, and I just checked the seats, and it's like, okay, cool. There's no one here. It's just going to be me. And by the time I got there, 2 other people had bought tickets. It was just 3 people in an auditorium. Risk is probably pretty low if we don't sit next to each other.
Right.
I think that's a good trick to pull if you're super desperate to get out there and see something on a big screen. Definitely avoid big movies on opening weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Fortunately, I don't think we have to worry about that for a few months.
Yeah, we're kind of in that lull here. We've got in fact, all of the nominated films were released in 2021, so they may be getting their wider release in the first quarter of this year as we lead up to Oscars and Oscar buzz and so forth. But the screeners are already out there. I mean, the ballots are getting into SAG-AFTRA members' hands here pretty soon, and it's going to be too late. But what they're trying to do, of course, is to beef up the visibility of these films, so when they do win an award, they actually can cash in on that.
Yep.
Of course, the studios have to do that, and during this climate where so many films are being prevented from going into their first release in the theaters, they need to recoup those monies however they can, whether it's premium pricing on HBO Max or one of the other streaming channels, or sell it for a higher price to one of the streamers like Netflix or Amazon Prime.
I will say the good news is pretty much since the fall, probably around the time ShangChi came out, just about every time I go to a cinema, they have been checking vaccination status, and that is a requirement to get into the building, which I know some people think, oh, that's just ridiculous. How can you enforce those kind of stupid rules? And it's like, well, they're protecting their patrons and they're protecting their employees.
Yeah.
And protecting employees right now is, as we've seen across this country, is ludicrously important, because losing any number of your workforce right now is hitting some industries very hard. Just go to your local drive-through and try to order a burger after 9 o'clock.
Oh, sure. They're short-staffed so badly. And of course, I keep my fingers on the pulse of Disneyland and what's happening down there. And there's a lot of restaurants that are actually closing up shop, counter service restaurants, for example, at 5, 6 o'clock, simply because they don't have staffing levels to support these restaurants through closing. And that's, of course, endemic across the United States and across many industries. Anything that's in food service or retail, that's what we're up against. There's lots of political give and take that can happen here, but suffice to say, it has also hit the movie theaters. Those that actually scoop up the popcorn, take the tickets, and guide you to your seat. Those were the days. Clean up the theaters after you've sat with your giant bucket of popcorn. Those folks, there's not as many of them to service the movies that are coming through. It's the same amount of time in each day and hopefully the same number of showings, but fewer people to put on a good show.
Yep. So if you're going to go to a cinema, just be ready to, bear with any of those regulations. Hang on to that mask, because, and again, speaking as someone who used to work 10-hour shifts at Amazon and had to be masked up all day, even SpiderMan, a 2.5-hour film, like, that's nothing,
Once you're in the story, you forget it's on.
Yeah.
It's just part of the experience. You're breathing.
Yep.
Why make a fuss? Why?
So I want to look at some box office numbers to see just sort of what it took to get audiences back. And again, as we look at, I want to specifically look at the top roughly 15 films of the year.
Yeah.
By where they were released. So Godzilla vs. Kong was easily one of the earliest big release films of the year, and surprisingly did prove that people were ready to go back to theaters, despite the fact that it was released day and date on HBO Max. It ended up pulling in 99 million, which that's absolutely solid, especially considering that considering A, the pandemic, and B, that the last film had been panned by critics and received pretty poorly at the box office. This was not only a sign that people were ready to return to theaters, but a sign that this franchise isn't dead.
Now, quick question for you. Does this include the premium pricing that they charged on HBO Max, or is this just theater grosses?
They didn't charge a premium on HBO Max for this. But
they did run it at the same time.
They did run it at the same time.
Okay, so you're seeing $100 million here. Yeah. That's global box office, I presume, yeah?
No, this is just domestic.
This is just domestic. Okay, so that's actually a very good acid test.
Yeah.
$100 million gross in the theater while it was playing concurrently And I can see here it's only 3,100 screens as opposed to 4,400 or pushing 5,000 for the big tentpole films. This was very early on. I think you're right. I think there's enough evidence here that supports that it can work as a model, but the big question is, does it work as well? Well, we got 3 lawsuits that we mentioned in one breath that would imply maybe not, because the actors are feeling a bit put out by their paychecks that they couldn't gross as much. I'm of the camp, let's release it to theaters because that's the way that the directors and the filmmakers intended it to be seen. How about that be the only reason?
Well, we're going to look at a completely different strategy here next, because one of the next big films to release in the top 15 was A Quiet Place Part 2, which sort of represented the first big summer release. Now, Quiet Place Part 2 ended its theatrical run with 160 million. So audiences were definitely ready to come out to see that. And Paramount's plan was, with all their big films, was a 45-day theatrical window that extends, as long as it needs to. But after that 45 days is up, it goes to Paramount Plus. I think that is, I'm just going to say it for right now, I think that's the best strategy of any of the streaming services.
The 45-day window?
Yeah, the 45-day window.
That's interesting because I landed on that as well. It seems to give the films enough breathing room, and yet they don't become so stodgy sitting at 1, 2, 3, and 4 that at the multiplex, that's all you see week after week after week. Let's refresh the marquee. I like it. I like it a lot.
And yeah, like you just said, a 45-day window is, these days, I think it's sad that a 45 window these days is kind of what a film gets, even pre-pandemic, but that's just what it is now because there's so many movies now.
Yes, and so many movies of really good quality. As the industry comes down holistically in price, what it takes to actually create a film, there's very little argument that you can do it on a much lower budget than you could just 10 years ago, and the quality of the product is so much better. Now, obviously, they're not going to be shooting on Panaflex lenses, if you're releasing a $10,000 film for your academic project, but by the same token, you actually can get a product out there, even into the festivals, for less than 6 figures. It can be done.
Let's move on to 2 movies that were released within a few weeks of each other in the summer. F9, Fast and the Furious 9, and Black Widow, which Fast 9 ended up with 173 million, Black Widow 183 million. I think Black Widow was one of the first really, really big tests because it was the first Marvel movie. And we have, at this point, set the bar extraordinarily high for what a Marvel movie should make at the box office.
Well, then let's do a little bit of a comparison here, because if we've got Black Widow sitting at $184 million in 2021, if we go back to 2019, Spider-Man Far From Home, this is telling. That grossed $390 million domestically, but it played on 4,600 screens. So not a huge statistical margin difference for the number of screens it played on, but the number of dollars that it generated for a comparably reviewed film. What do you think? It would seem logical to me that the pandemic has taken a big bite out of domestic gross receipts.
Yeah, even for these films that have done well.
Right.
I mean, an executive at any of these studios may scoff at 100 million. I do not. We have to go back to Black Widow was a day and date release on Disney Plus. Now Disney Plus had the premium priced on it. So if you wanted to watch Black Widow at home, you had to dish out $30 on top of what you were paying already for Disney Plus.
Which I don't believe is reflected here. This should be just gross box office.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So we really don't have the numbers that we can pile on top of it to see if it works, but it's really the shareholders that make that decision, isn't it?
Yep. So it's curious, and it's just curious to see, like, Black Widow also came, and Fast 9 also sort of came out during the Delta era. So if you weren't vaccinated, even though they didn't really have a lot of mandates at cinemas, I think a lot of people were still being very cautious in those early summer days. And it really wasn't until Shang-Chi came out that we had sort of peaked with Delta and had a lot more vaccinations. And Shang-Chi ends up with 224.5 million.
Right.
And it was the first, Shang-Chi was the first film of the year to break 200 million domestically. Not a surprise for a Marvel movie. But it was final. I think it was finally time to have a big movie do sort of pre-pandemic numbers, because that was that beautiful grace period where we peaked with Delta and we were starting to get mandates in movie theaters, and people, it's not perfect, but people felt a little bit more safe.
Mm-hmm. And then we get into the Omicron era, and I think, and again, this is just pure speculation on my part, but there is enough anecdotal evidence to support people are getting a little weary of COVID-19 and constantly hearing those words over and over again. Oh, it's another variant. Well, when are we going to get on with our lives? Well, then they get the message that it is not as severe. You put those two things together and people are going to go out to the movie theaters to get some sense of relief. And I recognize that there is a safe way, as you've already discussed, Ben, doing that. And so what we're seeing here, Spider-Man No Way Home, easily double $573 million. Wow.
Yeah.
During a pandemic. But compare that to Avengers Endgame, $858 million. But it's also the end of an entire era of films. So
yeah.
Can you really compare the two?
It's tough.
Hard to say.
It's tough. It's also just tough to compare. Like some years, it's the holiday films that draw in the biggest audiences. Some years, it's the summer films. Lord of the Rings being the example of, like, that was a trilogy that we couldn't imagine those being summer films. For whatever reason, we look back on this. Of course, those are holiday films. We watch the trilogy, in the winter. It's
right.
just what we do.
Right.
But is that what we do with Marvel films? I don't. Would Spider-Man have benefited from being a summer release? Maybe, but it also went up against little competition.
Mm-hmm. We've got some really high quality films in the top 10 for gross box office receipts. And even if you don't necessarily like the film, it had enough appeal to get people back in the theaters. And I think that's what's big news for people like you and I who are advocating for films and the theatrical experience. If you can do it safely and you feel safe doing it, get into the theaters, because indeed, this is how these films were intended to be presented. And I'll give you one small regret that I have. And that's Ghostbusters Afterlife. And I will be in the majority, but barely. I think Ghostbusters Afterlife is a very special film. And it's going to take a couple more viewings to get my head wrapped around it. Yes, there's plenty of fan service there and some of the detractors. You've got a lot of firm ground to walk on, but I'd be happy to debate the issue for you. My point is, it was a film that I liked a lot, but I think I missed some things visually in the storytelling, because there was so much visual to take in. And I won't throw out any spoilers at all. If I had the theatrical experience, it could have been even better, because I recognized on the smaller screen, even in 4K, there's detail I'm missing. So the theatrical experience, the way the director intended it, that's the first place you should go.
I will say one last thing on the box office that I think is important to note, and is a little bit indicative, again, of what it is we want to take in right now. Of those top 15 films, and I'll just go through them all right now: Spider-Man, Shang-Chi, Venom, Black Widow, Fast 9, Eternals, No Time to Die, A Quiet Place, Ghostbusters, Free Guy, Jungle Cruise, Godzilla vs. Kong, Dune, Halloween Kills, and Encanto. Gary, how many of those films are original properties that are not sequels, that are not based off of some other type of IP?
One.
I count two. I got Encanto and Free Guy.
Free Guy. Yeah.
That's it. And, I think Free Guy's been around long enough that we can spoil this just a little bit. Free Guy is very liberal with its appropriation of other IP. So even then,
completely unapologetic, and is probably the best comedy of the year, easily.
Oh yeah. But Encanto that makes Encanto easily the most original film to break the top 15.
Yeah.
We right now are, like you said, we want our comfort food.
Yes, we do.
We want it badly, even if the films aren't necessarily happy films. They're familiar.
You mean like A Quiet Place? It's a sequel, but it's also one of the best sequels ever made in a genre I don't particularly care for, but I'm on the edge of my seat with this series, right? But in addition to the comfort food that we see in the top 15, it is worthy of note. We don't even have to talk about it, that the festival films are still there.
Yeah.
They're still being seen. They're still being produced, and they're coming out. We're going to see them. We've seen certainly a preview with the Golden Globe Awards, and then coming, I think, later this week, we're going to see the nominations for the Academy Awards, and we'll see some big hitters like Power of the Dog ascend to the top of the ranks for nominations, but it's not in this list. Even if it had a theatrical release, it wouldn't be in this list. Well, the reason is simple. People could take, and this is again just conjecture on my part, people can take that level of drama if they can control their environment a little bit better. It's clearly a very well-received film, but perhaps something that can be taken in better in a more intimate environment, not shared with your friends with whom you're wondering are actually sharing more than you want.
Well, that's actually a really good segue into our next topic of conversation, which is streaming versus screening.
I think I did that on purpose or something.
Very clever. So we've established that people are ready to go back to the movie theater, and they are willing to go en masse if it's the right movie.
Mm-hmm.
But this year, or rather 2021, offered several streaming options. Options are a good thing. But you just mentioned Power of the Dog, which I did watch this last week, and it is incredible.
Yeah.
And, you talk about losing a lot of the theatrical experience. I was sitting there watching The Power of the Dog thinking, this isn't Avengers, this isn't this big, grand escapism, but holy hell, those landscapes would be beautiful to see on a big screen.
Yes, those beautiful New Zealand landscapes that we could see on the big screen in any of the Lord of the Rings films. She captured Montana in New Zealand within that 235 or 240 frame so perfectly that you can you're watching it on the little screen and you're going, oh, this deserves the big screen treatment. And it does. It truly does. Gratefully, the power of the performances and the script, which is practically bulletproof, it carries the film on the small screen just fine. But you're right. It would have meant so much more to see it up there. You're right.
And another movie I watched just this week was Tick, Tick, Boom. And to be able to be in a movie theater and to hear that, the music and the sounds all around you in a film like that is so important. My audio setup it's terrible. I've got the audio coming out of my TV. That's it. I'm missing so much, and I love going to the theater and just being surrounded by sound. We lose so much. I think that every film that was intended to be made for a big screen, like you said, should be on a big screen. Yes, there are plenty of films out there, smaller films, that get those direct to video releases. And it's like, obviously, your goal there was just to get your film into someone's hands. Your next goal should be to get your film onto a screen. That's just your stepping stone right now. That's what direct to video movies are all about. That's your start. Go up to the next level, because every now and then there's a direct-to-video feature that is actually really good, and that's where you hope, like, okay, this is the one we need to see because we need to get this director, this screenwriter up to the next level.
Right. And it's easy to say, it's easy to argue that you need to get onto the smaller screen first, but use the tools that give you the panoramic scope of the big screen by utilizing tools such as lightweight drones to get these sweeping, what used to be a Lumicrane you had to bring out to get these huge sweeping shots. Well, now all you have to do is use a remote control, and it's smooth as silk with their gyro stabilizing systems and being shot in 8K. Oh my God. And it doesn't cost you $20,000 for this gear either. You can do a low budget film with the tools the big boys use and at least get them in the festivals to get your feet wet. But the cost having come down, the streamers makes accessibility go up. So if something doesn't hit a festival, it can still go to YouTube. It can still go directly to some of the smaller streamers, or even hit pay dirt and go to Amazon and Netflix. I think it's an opportunity for filmmakers that have not yet found their footing to find their voice by utilizing the streaming services.
You were just talking about how these streaming services are a great place for these smaller films, but you know, a film like Power of the Dog, Jane Campion, established director. You know, I do wish that Netflix would, and they very well may, once the Oscar nominations are announced, make a push for this for a week or two on bigger screens. Hopefully the same, happens with Tick, Tick, Boom, or like, I don't think it's going to get like the same kind of Oscar buzz as those two, but something like Don't Look Up, like imagine watching that in a theater with a big audience and you're just laughing. Right. I love going to see comedies and just having everyone laughing.
Oh, that contagious laughter around you. There's nothing like it. And you're absolutely correct in the sense that by having them on Netflix exclusively, we seem to, if not limit the audience, we limit the potential of the frame on the screen. Because we know why these films were made. They were made to be shown not on a little 70-inch screen, but this massive thing that we see before us that you can only get in a movie theater. That's what they were made for. I think that Netflix, if we look at them as an ally, as Jane Campion did, there's some bonus material that follows the film. And she said something that I found very interesting, that Netflix was a partner. And she was grateful to have Netflix there. Yes, there were challenges. For example, they didn't have the budget to shoot in Montana like they would have wanted. But they did have the ability to shoot and scout in New Zealand, her home country, where she could find these brilliant locations that would substitute brilliantly for the actual place. If they can expand their reach as a studio, as Amazon is doing as well, to produce quality television product as well as cinema product, give the cinema product a release in the theaters, not just for the sake of award season, but so that they can be seen as they are intended to be seen, and then retreat them back into the streamers. And I think your model, Ben, whether Amazon is the studio or Netflix is the studio or Paramount is the studio, they all have a streamer to back them up now. Give them their 45 days, whether it's a tentpole film or if it's a little indie film, at the very minimum, give them their 45 days due.
Yep. Netflix, Amazon, everybody.
Play nice in the sandbox.
Play nice in the sandbox, because we have entered the era. I love this. I don't remember exactly who coined this, but this is the era of the content wars.
Yes, very true.
We are not in the streaming wars anymore. It's just the content wars, because the whole goal now is who has, and I hate to say this, we just talked about quality content. In some cases, it's simply who has the most content.
Yes, that's true. And if you, for example, I think I put a little something up on Facebook the other day about this. I was scrolling through the offerings at Paramount. It's one of the newer streamers, and they hang their hat a lot on the Star Trek IP. Makes sense wherever they can shine, but they'll tell you how many movies they've got in their library. Okay, well, just get past the first 10%. What? The man from who is this actor? Really, I mean, it's just a laundry list of titles and half-baked movie posters that you've never heard of. But it's another title. It adds to that nearly 2,000 movies that they have in their library.
I don't have Paramount, but I have that problem with Amazon. You go through what Amazon has, and it's just like, okay. You've got, and it's also frustrating because with Amazon, what you get on Prime may not be what you want to watch. What you want to watch may be something you have to, again, pay an extra, thankfully it's not the Disney Plus premium price of 30, but you may have to shell out, $3 or $4 to rent it for a day, which can be frustrating.
And the same thing holds true for Paramount. And if we're talking about the streamers, and if there's any downside to the streamers, they can say all day long, well, we have X number of movies and X number of shows. Okay, how many of X number of movies are actually included in the $140 that I pay a year, as opposed to the ones that I have to rent on top of that? $140 to access to pay more is not a feature. They may think it is, but from my view, it is not. But truth be told, year over year, there is something that we do have an advantage of, and that is we're not going into video stores anymore trying to find a title that's not going to be there. For these films that are in the mainstream in particular, digital delivery makes sense. We can digitally archive a lot of films that most people wouldn't have access to. We are very lucky to have in our backyard Scarecrow Video, which as a not-for-profit, and I will throw my hat in the ring, Scarecrow Video, you are the bomb. And they are a video store in not-for-profit that has some of the most esoteric titles you've ever seen on any platform and format you can possibly imagine. But if you're Joe in Ohio, if you can't stream it, you can't get it. So from an artistic point of view, the streamers have a real advantage in being able to distribute their reach of films that have long since served their useful life, but yet find a new audience. And for you, for example, all of the monster movies in the Universal domain, they can find a new audience just by virtue of being around on the streamers.
Yep, you can find them on Peacock.
That's it.
Well, the Universal ones, I think a lot of the Hammer ones are on HBO. So get out there, people. Watch the old horror movies; they're great. I think you bring up a good point about that because imagine if video stores in general were still a thing. If Blockbuster and Hollywood Video, imagine, being the poor sucker who gets off work at 6 o'clock on the day that Endgame is out and it's like, I'm going to go to Hollywood Video and I'm going to rent Avengers Endgame.
Sure you are.
It's gone, and it's going to be gone for weeks.
Right. That is a thing of the past. I mean, we were frustrated by that. All of us were frustrated by that. In the first couple of weeks, you had this huge glut, and then it would die off as now all of the Hollywood Videos had too many of one movie and not enough of the others. What an inventory nightmare for them. And now that's gone.
Oh, but you know what? It did give us the, walk into Hollywood Video. Hey, look at that. 3 movies for $15 on DVD. Sold.
Right. When something ran out, it made you dive a little bit deeper into the video store and maybe unearth some treasures that you didn't see before.
Yep.
And that part I miss. And I didn't think I realized I missed it until I watched the recent documentary about The Last Blockbuster, which I believe that's the name of the film. And it's in Bend, Oregon, gang. And it's the story of The Last Blockbuster. And in the process of telling that story, of course, they tell the history, and we talked to some folks that patronize the store. And I was reminded that there's something special about the tactile going through the aisles,
Oh yeah. I love just going into, and I haven't done this in a long time because of the pandemic.
Right.
Just like I have, some extra spending money this week. I'm just going to go into Best Buy and just look. Nowadays I pre-order or order for pickup, walk into Best Buy, pick it up, leave.
Mm-hmm.
That's just how it works now. And it's also just, it's also that way now because, with the rise of streaming and with online ordering, it's slim. You walk into a Target or a Best Buy or a Walmart, their entertainment department is slim pickings when it comes to movies.
Mm-hmm. It used to be you would go into a movie department or even a record department back in the day, and there were sales staff that were there that were knowledgeable not only about the technology, but about the films themselves and could make recommendations. That stuff I miss. You can find people and commonality just by walking into a video store. Oh, I saw that film. That was a really good picture. You're going to really... Come on, we don't get that by punching a few buttons. And of course, with the day of the instant streamers, what is the value of pricing something at the same price as a physical product? Don't get that much.
Yeah. I mean, that's honestly the way you just phrased that is, I think, why Disney Plus's 2021 strategy. Um, I don't think it exists. I think they bailed on it.
I think that's true. And there's a few people that are calling for Bob Chapek's head as a result of that, and a few other missteps that I could regale you about. But yeah, there's some truth to be said about the streaming model with the premium pricing on products that people want to see in the theater. It almost feels punitive. People are feel like they're being punished for having to fork over $30 for a movie.
Because we already talked about HBO's strategy, how it's hit and miss, but overall it seemed to have worked for them when they make sure that the studios they're working with are well compensated.
Sure.
Paramount seemed to have the most consumer friendly approach with a theatrical and then a streaming release shortly after.
That as a loss leader, you bet. But Disney wanted to capitalize it, and Disney being Disney, they wanted to wring as much cash out of every property that they could.
And what confused the heck out of me with Disney's strategy was, why the heck did they just decide altogether that Pixar shouldn't be in movie theaters at all?
Oh, Red. Yeah.
It's so frustrating.
Encanto is a beautiful film. Seeing Red is going to be an equally beautiful product. Somebody explained to me Bob's logic of releasing one film during Thanksgiving and then punting Pixar. I don't understand that at all. And that's 3 movies in a row, pal, that Pixar has been the bastard stepchild of Disney corporate, and I don't get it. They are still Pixar. They're still putting out incredible product.
I get why they did it with Soul. They didn't do a premium price on that one. I get why they did that because we were in unvaccinated state. It was Christmas Day. It's like it's a good Christmas present for the kids.
It was a good call. I agree.
But it's like, okay, we're missing Soul in the movie theaters, but we're all freaking out about going to movie theaters.
Right.
But at this point, we're at this point this year. It's like Luca gets a summer release on Disney Plus, and it's like, why isn't it in the movie theaters?
Right.
We're proving right now that movies can be in theaters.
Right. So it goes to an exclusive release on Disney Plus, and it misses its opportunity to be seen as it should be shown. And again, here's another film that was a sleeper only because it didn't get its audience opportunity.
And also, it frustrates me that if you go to Disney Plus and you look at Soul and Luca on there, they literally have the Disney Plus original logo in the corner. And it's like, that's not what they are. These are Pixar films. This isn't, I accept that you put these logos on your Marvel TV shows. They were made for, this. I don't feel like Pixar should be relegated to a studio that just makes Disney Plus stuff.
Right.
They're so much better than that.
I 100%.
So frustrating.
100%. And quite frankly, there's a lot of folks that actually hold a few shares of Disney stock that are in agreement with us.
Well, good for them.
Yeah. Well, remember what I said about Chapek's head. And that's all metaphor, gang.
Yeah. And I have not heard of any major Disney releases this year doing the Premier Access. I'm pretty sure that service is just DOA at this point.
Yeah, I think they've scuttled the strategy. I think they've seen the error of their ways on the balance sheet, and therefore moving forward, we don't want any more lawsuits. We'll release them to theaters first. Money talks.
And last year, HBO announced that 2021 would be the only year that they did day and date theatrical and streaming. That I would not be surprised if that changes if pandemic numbers surge to ridiculous levels again, and we have to avoid movie theaters. But, while that strategy was around, I think it was good for when we were in that unvaccinated state, and just needed to stay home as much as I wanted to see Godzilla and Kong. Right. It was just like, nope, it's safer this way.
The reality is that if we take one for the team now, we should have been saying this 2 years ago. We were saying this 2 years ago. Then in a year, we don't have to. Well, we didn't do it in 2020. We didn't do it in 2021. Maybe in 2022, we can live with this particular virus, not necessarily hand in hand swinging and singing songs, but
No.
it's there. We live with it and still able to go to the movies.
Yep. And I'm going to get a little scientific on this one, not necessarily political. Just get out there and get vaccinated if you can, and you're not. Please do it.
Thank you.
Please get it done in this country so that we can start helping other countries that are not as able to help their citizens. Scientific rant over.
Rarer.
I do want to talk very briefly about, again, my frustration with Netflix and streaming services that don't release their films to theaters or to home video, because Disney has a crazy opportunity right now to not release a lot of their big movies to home video and just say you have to have Disney Plus. But guess what, everyone? By the time you're watching this, you could go out to Best Buy or Target and buy a copy of Encanto. It's coming out this week. As frustrated as we just were about discussing how Luca didn't make it to theaters, Luca did make it to home video. Apple TV, we even talked about Apple TV Plus. They actually did release The Tragedy of Macbeth on movie screens and on Apple TV Plus. It can be done.
It can. It certainly can. And again, these are all films that are, if not yet, Oscar-nominated films. They are either nominees for the Golden Globe or they won. There's no reason why the content can't be king. And not only content in terms of volume, but in terms of quality. We're seeing a lot of young filmmakers produce some extraordinary work, and we've got the outlets for it. The outlets just need to be wisely chosen given the environments that we are in. When can we do a full-throated tentpole release of a film like Luca? I think that was a miss. It should have been released to the theaters at the time. But here we are playing armchair quarterbacks when all of that is in the rearview mirror. They had to make those decisions on the fly. So moving into 2022 with those lessons learned, can you see them putting more films up on the big screen first?
I hope so. Again, unless pandemic numbers rise, I think Warner Brothers is going to start going to theaters first again.
Yeah, because Suicide Squad was a simultaneous release. I think I saw that on the day of release at home, and it was, of course, brilliant. But I thought the same thing you did. This deserves to be on the big screen. This is incredible.
I saw it on the big screen. It was great.
I bet you had a ball with it too. When did that come out, in June?
No, it was either late July or early August.
Okay, so it was a summer release, though. That's what I was thinking. Okay.
One last thing I just want to mention before we move on to the next topic is, again, venting my frustrations about a lot of stuff not being on home video. It just, to me, it feels like gatekeeping, because years ago, we never, and I'm almost certain I brought this up before, maybe not with you, but in the era of DVD and then Blu-ray, not every studio said we need to make our own DVD player so that you can only watch Universal movies on a Universal DVD player, Disney movies on the Disney DVD player. The closest we got was the Blu-ray versus
HD.
What was it? HD DVD war that petered out very quickly. And that wasn't, and studios took sides, but it wasn't studios saying we all have our own player. These content wars, to me, is every studio saying we have our own, and the only way to watch the stuff we make is to get ours. And it's just, to me, it's extraordinarily frustrating, because it's becoming more expensive than cable if it keeps going like this.
It's not just keep going like this, Ben. I think we're already there. All one has to do is pull out a piece of paper and a pencil, much less an Excel spreadsheet, and just do the math. $17.99 here, $9.90 there, $6.99 somewhere else for Discovery Channel, and then all of a sudden you're paying way more than you were before. And we're movie buffs, not necessarily team sports aficionados, which would add a whole other layer of cost on top of it. So the things that we can do to mitigate the cost, at least for me, is I ameliorate the cost by being selective. We have tools now that we don't necessarily have to scroll through a bunch of junk and not decide on anything. Analysis paralysis. How many people have logged into Netflix and you can't find a damn thing to watch? There's too much. But if you go onto a site like Rotten Tomatoes, which presents you with some options, someone who curates the movies for you and filter those results better than what Netflix can do for you, so that you can actually get a list that's more manageable, whether it's award-winning or a genre that's for you specifically. That's when you can make the streamers work well for you. Find out who's got the most product for the least price. That's what's most beneficial to you. For me, that's a clear low-hanging fruit. That's Disney Plus and Netflix. Simple. Most of the content that I consume would be on one of those two platforms. That makes it easy. Many other folks may have other specific shows that are on Paramount. If you can only get Discovery on Paramount, well, you're kind of beholden to that, at least for that period. But there's also another strategy that you can employ that is completely above board, but folks don't necessarily know that it's available. And that's time shifting through services like playon.tv, where you can actually record the show in real time. You have to have the account to be able to view later. Well, it also allows you to leverage things like 7-day trials to see if the thing will work for you, record it, play it back at your leisure, and then see if the service is for you. And again, these are all legitimate ways to at least leverage a system so that you're not paying through the nose for services that you don't know are going to be useful for you. Take advantage of the trials.
Another feature I do want to point out that I appreciate, but I wish could expand into other platforms. Netflix and Disney Plus, I know, do this, and that's on the mobile versions. You can download certain content so that it's available if you don't have internet access. Yeah. I wish you could do that on something like my Xbox, which has a much bigger hard drive than the memory I have on my phone. To be able to download, say, the entire series of WandaVision, internet goes out. Oh, good. I don't have to log into Disney Plus to watch it. It's just there on my Xbox. Nope, I can do it on my phone, though.
Right. And there are ways to do it. I mean, it's a show in and of itself, setting up media servers at home and being able to legally encapsulate your content within the confines of an external hard drive. There are ways to do it, but they're fairly technically involved. And there's a few viewers that may have done that already. But for downloading specifically, I know Amazon Prime and Netflix has limited titles that you can do that. So I think that if you were to use your home internet connection, your wireless connection, to download content to a device that can be distributed just inside your home, between Netflix and Amazon, there is a ton of content you can do that with. But again, you're beholden to the streamer to authenticate your device. You have to authenticate your username and password and say, oh, I'm here and I'm a legitimate user, to get access to the content that's stored on your device. See where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
That's when the media streamers come into effect, where you can use the media, that your physical media, pull that media onto a hard disk drive. It's completely legit. Archive your physical copy, put it away. Now you've got your movie in an alternative format so that the original is kept safe and your legitimate copy is on a server and easily accessible by your devices. That is one way of doing it.
I mean, also, and this is my final note on this, I just, I would love to have all those Marvel Disney Plus shows sitting side by side with my physical Steelbook collection. It'd be so nice.
And you can't do it.
I can't right now. And I can't have the complete collection on physical, and I can't have the complete collection on Disney Plus because of the stupid SpiderMan and Hulk deals.
Right.
It's like there's no way to have the complete Marvel collection. It's so frustrating.
Yeah. You could go.
Right.
I'll take this as a 30-second tangent. One of the things that I'm particularly fond of, and this goes way back 30 years, is the Warner Brothers cartoons, the shorts. And you can today go out and collect about half of the 1,700 cartoons that were produced from the myriad of DVDs that were released over the last 22, 23 years. That means that over 850 cartoons have never seen a media release, have never seen a streaming release, have never even been considered for being restored. point being is that there's a lot of IP that's still out there in the archives that these streamers can pull from. They don't necessarily have to be deriving from tentpole films that were released last week. They can actually unearth product that would be of interest to people like me and you and other movie aficionados for the shorts, the animated products that are available. Get those on the streamers as well. Or even the old archive TV shows that Disney has in the archives. Those wonderful World of Disney shows, the vast majority of them, 95%, have never seen the light of day. They used to have Vault Disney on the Disney Channel, and occasionally you can find them bad YouTube videos, very, very poorly executed and pixelated, but they're there. Wouldn't it be nice if they were remastered and on Disney Plus?
Yeah, they really would. And I agree with you, not just for everything that you said, but literally, like, they need to do this before they're lost to history.
Right.
You know, I think they're in much better shape than they have been in the past. But you know, we've lost a lot of content from the earliest days of film, all the way even through the 40s, because they were stored in a warehouse and the warehouse burned down. And it's like, you know, get them out there, get them on your services so that we can acknowledge their existence.
Exactly. We can't leave this up to the UCLA Film Library's Restoration Department. We can't leave it to the Library of Congress. Private monies needs to come in and help restore these films of antiquity so that they are not lost for future generations.
All right. So we're going to talk now about what we actually watched in 2021, specifically the movies, not necessarily the TV shows in this instance. We've talked a lot about that as they happened last year. I have my list. I have your list. Gary, do you have your list on you?
I do.
Okay, cool. So I'll read mine. You can read yours, and we'll see where we overlap. Because I think that'll be very interesting.
Be interesting. Okay, go ahead.
Mine are roughly, and this might be incomplete. I may have forgotten a few, but mine are roughly in the order in which I saw them. And I'm also actually including re-releases that I was able to see in the movie theater, because that was actually my first theatrical experience last year, was going to see a re-release, which was cool. Number one, first new movie I saw last year was Oh, nope. There's one I need to add on here. I forgot. Judas and the Black Messiah was the first new movie that I saw last year. Even though it's technically, I believe, a 2020 film, it did not get a release in the movie theaters or put on HBO until 2021. So, gotta love those awards movies.
Mm-hmm.
So then the next movie I saw was Raya and the Last Dragon.
Wonderfully animated film from Walt Disney Studios.
That was the first and only Premier Access film I paid for. Then Godzilla vs. Kong on HBO Max. And then I was vaccinated and I got to go see the original Mission Impossible in the movie theater, which is really cool. I can now say I've seen all 6 on the big screen. And crazy to think that Mission Impossible is 20 years old. And that Tom Cruise is still making these films.
Yeah, right.
Speaking of which, it was also funny to watch Ghost Protocol, see a young Jeremy Renner and think, oh man, remember the day when they were considering passing the torch to Jeremy Renner for this franchise and then they just gave up?
Whew. Glad they did.
Anyway, next, got to see the 10th anniversary release of Scott Pilgrim versus the World. That was a delight to see in theaters again. Then finally, my first original new film of 2021 on the big screen, Black Widow. And then Free Guy, The Suicide Squad, ShangChi, No Time to Die, Last Night in Soho, Eternals, SpiderMan. Going back to streaming, we're going to go to Don't Look Up, then back to the cinema for Nightmare Alley, and then in this last week on streaming, The Power of the Dog, Tick Tick Boom, and The Last Duel.
That's an incredible list, and you got some award winners that are coming up there. I think Power of the Dog is going to clean house. Let me run my list down real quick. We'll talk. Not necessarily in any order, but loosely in genre. We'll start with the animated films. And what I found really interesting, Ben, was there seems to be a concentration of the types of films that I watched as well. It wasn't really some of the more challenging films that I would expect me to watch in a given year. So here we go. Raya and the Last Dragon, Luca, Encanto, Vivo, which you don't have on your list, Also, The Mitchells versus the Machines, an incredible film, an amazing animated film that it just blew my mind. Black Widow, Spider-Man No Way Home, Ghostbusters Afterlife. I've already made mention of that. Zack Snyder's Justice League. Streaming only, obviously. Much better film, as we talked about earlier. Look up that episode if you have any ideas about watching this film. We do some justice talking about it. Let's see. ShangChi, Cruella. I've seen that film twice now on my 70-inch, and quite frankly, it is so close to being in my top 5. It is a wonderful film. Emma is fantastic. The two Emmas are just, they chew up the scenery. If you haven't seen this film, immediately, please. Jungle Cruise, which was laughable, which I think is the point. Whew, that's a lot of money down the drain for those effects. Free Guy, Gunpowder Milkshake, very disappointing. Hitman's Wife's Bodyguard, dumb fun. The Last Duel, that's 2.5 hours I won't get back. Power of the Dog, Belfast, The Suicide Squad. Finch, Tom Hanks property, really, really well done. Cyrano, that's Peter Dinklage. He should get a nod. The film, it's disjointed. It shouldn't have been a musical in my mind. I can't hum a single thing from it. Next film on my list, Pig, great indie film. Just absolutely striking visuals and an airtight story, and it should be streaming soon if it isn't already. Pig with Nicolas Cage. The Green Knight, watched it twice. I still don't understand it. In the Heights, a spectacular, splashy, colorful, scintillating musical that went absolutely nowhere. Why? Isn't Lin-Manuel Miranda, like the hottest thing since sliced bread? Because one of the films we're about to talk about certainly is. What happened? It's a very good film. Godzilla versus Kong earlier in the year. Good God. I mean, you and I talked about this. In fact, I asked you, what do I need to watch to warm up to it? And I did. I watched everything in the order you said. And the payoff was truly there. That is really a fantastic film. Granted, I had to watch it at home, but it was fun.
It's fun. It's dumb, but I love it.
Yeah, exactly. Big, dumb, and fun.
Yeah.
And earlier this year, I started the year just like you with Judas and the Black Messiah. It's interesting that one of the most important films of the year I saw earliest, a truly, truly special film.
Yep. I have to add two to my list because you mentioned them and I completely blanked.
Okay.
I watched Encanto last week. I don't know how that missed my list.
Okay.
And then of course, Zack Snyder's Justice League should be on my list because we talked about it. We had a whole
good
episode about it. Yes, of course I watched that. What I love about my list is I have reservations, some reservations about The Last Duel, but overall, for the most part, there's not a single movie on this list that I didn't appreciate in some way.
Yeah.
Even though like I say, Godzilla vs. Kong was pretty stupid. It did have a giant lizard fighting a giant monkey and a giant mecha lizard. So, it checks off a lot of boxes. Yeah, it's very interesting. I'm not surprised where we overlap in terms of the Marvel films and some of the superhero stuff. Yeah, that stuff. I'm really glad that we overlap with Power of the Dog. You mentioned that before we recorded this episode. I was like, I should probably watch this one. And I'm really glad I did. Let's see. Cyrano, Pig, and the Green Knight. Those are they're on my list to watch. And Cyrano is actually coming back to theaters.
Yes, briefly
soon. And I am sad I missed the Green Knight. It came and went, and then it came again, and went. And that's just a polarizing film, and I have to know: am I going to be on the side of like I get it and it's beautiful, or am I going to be on the side of I don't get it?
What was that film that Brad Pitt did? Tree of Life? Does that sound right? Oh my God, it falls in the same category. What did I just watch?
That's what I felt about that film.
I get to the end of it and I don't know what the hell I just watched. I got to either go back and try it again, or it was not worth my time. and usually I end up going, it had to be me. Not Tree of Life. Sorry, not
It's all
sorry.
good. I caught a little bit of Cruella. I saw my mom and my sister were watching it over the holiday break, and I walked in on a scene where Emma Stone is disguised as like a man.
Okay.
She has like a mustache. She has a
Yep.
mustache disguise.
Yep.
But my first thought, and I had to say this to them, was, what an ineffective disguise. How can Emma Stone disguise herself and not cover up her obvious Emma Stone eyes?
Well, I will say this. It is a film that is worth actually watching, not one of those that you just leave on in the background because it's clearly an IP that has been remade at least, I don't know, 15, 16 times, if you include the directed videos. But the creators crafted a really clever film, and the casting directors should be kissing their little finky, the rings on their fingies, because brilliant. The two leads in particular, but even the supporting cast is there for the two of them. And the production design, the music, and the script hold up. I mean, the script does have holes. Don't get me wrong. You could drive a truck through some of the holes that Cruella has got, but you're having so much fun, you don't care.
Yep. And I just said the same thing about Godzilla and Kong. I
Yep,
don't
right?
care.
Big,
It's
dumb,
fun.
and fun. I don't care.
Let's talk about our 5 favorite films of the year now.
Ugh,
I ranked mine. So you don't have to rank yours.
I will try.
So I'll start with my 5th favorite film of the year. Literally less than a week after seeing it, I had to put The Power of the Dog on this list. Cinematography, the performances, the screenplay, it's all there. Everything that I love about the film, the writing, the acting, and the visuals. And boy, oh boy, it was just the right level of uncomfortable.
Yeah. Now, is this your number 1 or your number 5?
My number 5.
Your number 5. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want my number 5 now, or do you want to go through the whole list?
Let's go one apiece.
Okay. All right. So, my number 5 is going to be Summer of Soul, documentary. The subtitle is "Or When the Revolution Could Not Be Televised." This was a concert that was performed and filmed, shot in full 3-color Technicolor film. 1969 was the summer, and it was a concert in New York, and it was supported by the people in the streets and in the neighborhoods before New York was truly cleaned up. But it was a festival of love of musicians that performed just exquisite sets, one after the other. But the reason why this never saw the light of day was for technical reasons. And now we have the added advantage here in the 21st century, being able to recapture this 16 millimeter footage and watch these performances of these incredible Black artists. Summer of Soul is my number 5 for the year.
Given our discussion not too long ago, I'm glad you picked a film that has been saved from being lost to history.
Yeah, exactly.
Wonderful. My number 4, and this will come as no surprise to anyone who knows me well, is Guillermo del Toro's Nightmare Alley.
Yep.
It's not quite the horror film that you get with Crimson Peak, or the weird fantasy that you get with Shape of Water. I think I still appreciate those films a little bit more, but this is just, it's vintage Del Toro, beautifully filmed. His use of color is almost unmatched in all of cinema. And boy, oh boy, he brought back Bradley Cooper in a way that, didn't expect to see from him. We're so used to seeing Bradley Cooper as just this suave, beautiful human being.
Right.
And boy, oh boy, is Nightmare Alley is not about the horrors of monsters and of the unknown. It's about the horrors of just the darkness of the human soul. And it just great performances from Bradley Cooper, from Rooney Mara, and you can never, ever go wrong with Cate Blanchett.
Mm-hmm.
And it is, it's dark and it is, even though it doesn't feature the horror elements, it is just as gory in moments as you would expect in a Del Toro film.
Sure.
He does love the color red.
But selective color red. It has to
Yes.
have impact. And I'll agree with you in the sense that I am a huge fan of Guillermo del Toro. This has not yet hit the streamer, so I have not yet seen it.
Actually,
I think it just came out, and I have not yet seen it. But I've been a fan from Hellboy, Pan's Labyrinth, Hellboy to the Golden Army. His aesthetic is unique. He produces a film, and you watch the final product, and I don't mean this in any way derisively. You know it's a Guillermo del Toro film. It has his signature stamp, his style, if you will. You could say the same thing of many of the great filmmakers. Hitchcock comes to mind, for example, in at least genre adjacent. And you can identify his films from their aesthetic or how he chose to shoot and compose his frame. And Guillermo del Toro, when you see the production values that go into his pictures and how he lays out his scripts and storyboards, his angles, you can see it. You can see that's Guillermo del Toro. And I just can't wait. It's just one of those things where, all right, there's just only so much time. How many movies can I watch in the next 2 months? So I'm really grateful you saw it and that the audience can hear from you, your enthusiasm for it. And I'm certainly now more than ever can't wait to see it.
Well,
So
it
that's
is streaming. It's streaming on both Hulu and HBO Max.
Okay.
So we even have options.
HBO Max it is. All right, number 4. My list is only malleable in the sense that I wasn't expecting to order them, but I think that's a fair ask. I'm going to put on number 4. I'm going to say The Last Duel is my number 4. This is a very divisive film. It's difficult to watch. It is the dark side of Groundhog Day in a way. If you don't know the conceit of the film, I won't explain it here, but don't ruin the experience by doing the wiki. This is one of those things where you have to go in nearly blind and you have to watch the film. Trigger warnings, it is an uncomfortable film to watch. There is sexual assault in the film that is exceptionally graphic for its rating. The leads are doing this, so understand that, of course, there was safety involved and intimacy coaches and everything, I'm sure. But in the moment, this film is very powerful, and the lines get really blurry. So fair warning. But the performances alone is what elevates the script. Ben Affleck is having the time of his effing life with this part. The stoic manner with which Matt Damon approaches his character and his self-determination to right what he feels is an injustice is something that I've not seen him do before. So I see these two actors really stretching themselves, and our lead is exquisite in this film. If it's something that you can stomach, it is a must-watch film, and it's certainly good enough to rank number 4 on my list of films for the year.
I was just, that movie made me so angry, but for the right reasons.
Right.
Absolutely the right reasons. If you watch this movie and you're not angry, you're missing the point.
Yeah.
And this may be a tale that takes place, ages ago, but it is tragically as relevant now as it was then. And boy, oh boy, this movie just makes me hate men.
Yeah, we actually had a house guest over at the time, a young man about your age, as a matter of fact, and he just came over to watch the film, and it was at his recommendation, and I went in blind, only loosely knowing that it was going to be a difficult film to watch. But there were a couple of times that we had the advantage by watching at home of being able to stop and unpack it. That's the kind of film this is. You could do that, but you couldn't do that in a theater, and the visceral experience could have overwhelmed some. It could have overwhelmed me, really.
Yeah, it's really something. And I will say honestly, better than I expected based on its box office and its sort of the mixed reaction from critics and audiences.
Yeah, I'll give them that there's some beef that's being given, that the script is a little loose in spots, that it could have tightened it up and it could have used a few more edits. I respectfully digress from that opinion. They told the story they wanted to tell. Shut up.
And we'll probably end up getting the exact opposite because it's a Ridley Scott film, and I'm sure there is so much that was cut.
Right.
And that's just how he rolls. We're probably going to get the 4-hour cut by year's end.
Why don't you give the film stock footage to Zack Snyder and let him recut the film?
Not a bad call at this point. All right, my number 3, and again, this should be no surprise. My fourth and third films are following a pattern here. Is Edgar Wright's Last Night in Soho. Edgar Wright, of course, at this point is mostly known for his comedic efforts with the Cornetto trilogy and Scott Pilgrim. He veered a little bit off of his usual course with Baby Driver, but Baby Driver still follows the same patterns
went off
of
course.
editing.
That was quick. That was good.
Yeah. His editing, his style, it was all there. Last Night in Soho, it is the least Edgar Wright film of all of his works, but it's still just it's crazy suspenseful. Like, it's a very different type of ghost story. And this one, it is a horror film.
Okay. Now, memory serves me correctly. This one's now served up on Netflix, correct?
No, I don't know. I don't think it is.
Tomatoes, let's find out real quick. Last Night in Soho. Yes, you are correct, sir. It's Apple TV and Prime Video as well.
Oh, it's on Prime. Cool.
Yeah. I haven't seen it yet, obviously, but the lead is incredible in last year's incredible series, Gambit, right? Do I remember that correctly?
Oh, Queen's Gambit. Oh, you're talking about Anya Taylor-Joy.
Yes, of course.
I thought you were talking about Thomas and Mackenzie, who her last big film was Jojo Rabbit.
Jojo Rabbit, which is also an incredible film from last year.
So just great horror film. Not quite the same editing style you're expecting with Wright, but it's still very tight, very well paced. And this is one of those things we're seeing on the big screen was important. The last performance of Dame Diana Rigg was just a delight to see her. I think it's the only time I've ever seen her on the big screen, because most of her big films are before my time. But if you don't know who I'm talking about, younger audiences will probably remember from Game of Thrones, in which she stole every single scene she was in.
Perfect character for her, right?
Yeah.
And she's known when she was young as
the only Mrs. James Bond and Mrs. Emma Peel on the Avengers TV series, not to be confused with the Marvel characters.
Right. She was charming then and effervescent throughout her career, and that she wrapped it up in her 80s doing what she loved. And what a great send-off, because it's a very good film, and obviously it's number 3 on your list.
So
number 3.
Into horror films, check that out.
Yes, absolutely. Number 3 on my list. Am I number 3 or number 2?
Should be on 3.
On 3, yes, is Cyrano. Now, Cyrano is not for the script, I'm afraid. It's certainly not for the memorable songs. It is for Peter Dinklage's performance. He is a miracle in this film. And Peter Dinklage, I'm a huge fan, going all the way back to Elf. His 10 minutes in that picture, he stole it. The whole scene is his to own. And that was 18 years ago? He goes on and turns several years on Game of Thrones and becomes a fixture on the small screen. And he takes that persona, that big personality of his, and puts it on the big screen in what is clearly not his most comfortable milieu, a musical, and not the most frighteningly well done musical ever. It literally does not have any hummable tunes in it. Well, why am I speaking so highly of this picture? Well, because Peter Dinklage is just that damn good in it. And when he is not singing and no one else is singing, there is a dramatic arc here that is very true to the original story. I adore the story, and part of my predisposition to love the film is because I love the story so much, but more than anything, it's because I love Peter Dinklage in it. And I recommend the film, and it's my number 3 based on that performance.
I do have the script. the original play, which is beautiful, and I do love Peter Dinklage. So if I'm able to catch it on the big screen, I might do that. But it's definitely one I want to see just for him, because, like you said, he's wonderful. He's so wonderful.
Yeah.
All right, my number 2, and I'm not going to discuss this film too much because we have an entire episode about it. You should go watch if you haven't. Is Spider-Man: No Way Home?
Well, tell us why, Ben.
It's just, I'll simply say this: throughout the entire year, discounting the TV shows, the Marvel movies took I think, an interesting trajectory this year. You know, when Black Widow came out, it was, yes, Marvel's back, and we just sort of enjoyed the hell out of it. And then ShangChi came along, and it was, oh, wow, I love Scarlett Johansson's performance as Natasha Romanoff, but ShangChi came out and was like, oh, dang, this is actually so much better than Black Widow was earlier this year. And then Eternals came out, and I know there's a lot, that's a very polarizing Marvel film, but I really appreciate Chloe Zhao trying to do something different in this universe. They needed a Chloe Zhao to come in and do something different, and they're going to need to do it again in a few years. They're going to need something different, and I appreciate that. Yes, it could have been a television series, but it's beautiful, and yes, it's got some major plot holes, but so does every Marvel movie when you really break it down. So, you know, I probably would say Shang-Chi I enjoyed more than Eternals, but Eternals I think is a lot better than a lot of people give it credit for. But Spider-Man comes along, and what the actual heck? This is another sort of turning point, not necessarily in the stories of what's being told in the MCU, but what the MCU is capable of doing. The way that this web was woven together, was that just it was perfect the way it was woven together because of all the history that came before it. And we appreciate that history more than we appreciate the history of other franchises. I'll just leave it at that.
There's something about this picture that makes it beyond fun. It gets under your skin in a very positive, uplifting way, even though there are some tragic moments in the film itself and some serious moments that we have to stop and pause and take stock. But in the end, what you come away with is this sense of satisfaction that you have seen something really special, and yet it's a tentpole Marvel film. This kind of feeling is supposed to be reserved for those quiet little indie pictures that really get under your skin and somehow make you pontificate about the world and your place in it and the grander universe. No, this is a Marvel movie and I'm doing that. Damn, how'd they do that? And that's really the power of cinema when it really comes down to it, is that when a film hits the big screen, everything evaporates except the story. Everything else should be transparent. The CG, the score, the sound effects, the production design, all of that is just gloss and smoke and mirrors. It's the story that they're telling. And the impact that I see on your face and your reverence for the film, and certainly mine as well, is that's all nice. But I care about Peter Parker. I care about these characters a lot. I care about what happens to them. And now at 13 years later, I'm so vested in the totality of the universe, like you say, what came before, that I'm vested in what happens in the future. And that's possibly at least a contributor why I had alluded earlier to why the actors portraying these characters are so important, because we're married to not just the characters, but also to the believability of the actors bringing their performance. So can I picture someone other than Jeremy Renner as Hawkeye? Yeah. But it would be a pretty big shift of attention to get me there. And there are other characters that are so iconic because of the actor, and that perception is going to be different for everyone. I certainly have mine. I can't imagine someone else doing that role, but yet we're all mortal. We'll see it eventually.
Yep.
But for right now, in this moment, Marvel did something that I don't think any studio has done before or since. They finished a spectacular franchise, and I feel like they're just getting started. What franchise has ever done that? I'll leave it at that.
And the only other thing I want to say is because I can't believe we didn't talk about this on the Spider-Man episode. Shout out to director John Watts for being the only director in the MCU to complete an entire trilogy as director himself. He beat James Gunn to it. Who else? He beat Peyton Reed. Peyton Reed and James Gunn are the only other two directors right now, who are going to have completed trilogies. And on top of that, John Watts has been given the keys to the Fantastic Four.
That is something I'm looking forward to, only in the sense that we have had 2 releases of that IP, neither of which met anywhere near the expectation. I thought Silver Surfer was actually a pretty good film, interestingly enough. But aside from that, yeah, I know most people thought it was a dumpster fire, but I would love to see a Fantastic Four that actually finally integrates into the Marvel Universe.
Yep. I think that's a huge part of what that team has been missing. As I also thought that was a huge part of what, Spider-Man had been missing before.
Mm-hmm.
And it's good to have Peter Parker team up with other heroes and not be mopey all the time.
Yes.
Gary, what's your number 2?
Oh, wow. You just gave me your number 2 as No Way Home, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, because I know this list all too well. You stole my thunder. I'm going with Spider-Man No Way Home as my number 2 as well, which probably leaves open my number 1. For anyone that knows me, they know what my number 1 is going to be now. But for all the reasons that we just talked about, Spider-Man No Way Home is a very special film. Even though it's a tentpole film, it's a Marvel film, it's got all the gloss and all the bells and whistles. I get that. But it's a very good story that's had an impact on a lot of people. $520 million can't possibly be wrong, and it's got a worldwide appeal. Well, the reason for that worldwide appeal is its timing, its script, it's the entire package. When it arrived in the theaters is when we needed to see it, is what I said earlier, and I'll double down on that statement. And that's why it's so successful and why it's number 2 on my list.
All right. I have a feeling I know what your number 1 is as well.
Yeah, I know you do.
I'm very excited to talk about it. But my number 1, Spider-Man No Way Home would have been my number 1 if not about 2 months earlier we had gotten the final outing of Daniel Craig as James Bond 007, No Time to Die. When I recently talked to someone, they asked me, do you like Spider-Man? Would you pick Spider-Man No Way Home or No Time to Die? And it didn't, honestly, it was just a second. It's like, I have to pick No Time to Die. I realize it's not the mass appeal one that Spider-Man is. Not everyone went out to see James Bond. But anyone who knows me well knows that I have been a lifelong fan of the franchise. I have, the poster right behind me. I inherited James Bond from my dad, and it is one of the very few franchises that I inherited from him that I could never really also take away from him, that never became mine. I got Godzilla from my dad, and I ended up buying all the movies. He only ever saw like the first couple. I got Star Wars from my dad. Well, Star Wars was passed on to it, keeps getting passed on to a younger generation. Eventually, I will lose Star Wars to the younger generation. But Bond was the one thing that he could give me that he always had, that would always define him more than it defined me. And that's, for a lot of people, Spider-Man No Way Home is great because it celebrates several years of that character and of nostalgia.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, No Time to Die celebrates a lifetime of nostalgia for films that, for the most part, were made before I was born. And just a huge part. It was incredibly. Not everyone's going to have the same reaction to seeing No Time to Die, but it was an incredibly emotional experience for me because my dad and I saw Spectre in 2015, and I'm going to spoil the end of Spectre because, it's 7 years old now. At the end of Spectre, James Bond and Madeline Swan drive off in the Aston Martin, and it's seemingly a happy ending for the character. And shortly after, Daniel Craig had announced, "I'm done with the role." And they were able to bring him back, and for the first time ever, um, audiences knew well before this film was coming out, this is it. This is Daniel Craig's last take. That's never happened before.
Mhm.
You know, Connery retired twice. Moore kept going until he shouldn't have. I know I love Roger Moore, but he should have been done well before A View to a Kill. Dalton sadly got sacked after, you know, License to Kill underperformed and just wasn't the Bond movie that everyone wanted. And there was so many years before we got Brosnan. Brosnan's run was just such a mixed bag, and he unfortunately got sacked. And then Craig came in, and what Craig and the producers and the writers brought to Bond with his run was so different from what we'd ever had. It was finally a character that was more than just a killer. He had an arc, he had dimensions, and No Time to Die really just drove it home with, this is the end of this character's arc. And once that, you know, it was just so damn emotional, because in the years since my father has passed away, I've gone to see so many movies, and there's so many things he's missed out on. He missed out on the end of the Skywalker saga, the end of the Infinity Saga. But as I've said, Star Wars was sort of passed on to my generation and will be passed on to other people's generation. For my dad, Star Wars was primarily that original trilogy, and I think he's fine having experienced that. I think that for my dad, last movie was Thor Ragnarok for the MCU, and I think for my dad, that was a good enough way to end it, seeing his favorite character, Hulk, get the film that he had so long deserved, alongside one of his favorite newer characters in the MCU, which was Thor. But for the first time in a long time, I went and saw a movie, and my dad was supposed to be there. I'm sorry.
Take a minute.
He was supposed to be there because this was the end of it. I'm glad that he got to experience a happy ending for James Bond, but he didn't get to experience the right ending. This was the way it should have been. And it's a beautiful final moment. I won't say anything about it. All you need to know is it's his last film, and his send-off is absolutely perfect. And the film is a beautiful homage to almost every Bond film that came before it. But in particular, it's the film, the series, his run drew so much inspiration from my favorite film, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and No Time to Die very blatantly takes from that film. And, you know, for the first time in, what are we at? 53 years at this point, since that film was released. It's validated that film. It's validated George Lazenby's human performance of Bond. And I think anyone who hasn't seen that film and they watch No Time to Die, they need to go back, because it's going to fill in so much and make No Time to Die an even better film.
Right.
Craig's performance is just wonderful. Yes, the film has its shortcomings. It's not the best villain. I mean, you can't beat Skyfall in terms of just pure villainy for the Craig series. Yes, people have complaints that it follows up Spectre too much, because Spectre wasn't so great. But it, you know, for all the people out there hating on Spectre, just go watch some Roger Moore films, or go watch Die Another Day, and then, because like the Craig films at their worst are still Bond in a really good place.
Right.
And this just, I've said so much already. That's, if you're a Bond fan, it's freaking nirvana.
I have to confess that here we are, almost 3 months later. I've not yet seen the film. But interestingly, I don't have much in the way of spoilers, but what you did say affirms what I have heard from the people that really did respond to this picture, and that is that it gives James Bond a fullness of character that we've never seen before. It's not just this one-dimensional killer for hire. We see sides of Bond that we probably, at least I've craved to see, that a sense of happiness drift into his life that he can hold on to is something that I crave. And those that have seen the film, they may be going, yeah, but you're going to get to see that. I don't know. What I can tell you is that for those that have a personal connection to the Bond films, like you do with your dad, because the series goes back so far, because so many relationships were either forged or galvanized through James Bond, it becomes an experience that we share. And clearly you shared that with your dad. I don't have that kind of reverence for a picture because of something that I shared with my dad. And that's something I think that's really special that you did with Peter. And that's really great to see. And the picture may be number one on other critics' lists, but it's number one on yours for a very specific reason. I think that's the best reason of all. It's your connection to your dad. And I appreciate that.
Thank you, Gary. Let's talk about your number one, because I have a feeling it's going to be an uplifting, fun film.
Yes, it is. It's an uplifting, fun film. And point of fact, I think that everyone that's listening to this is probably going, oh, I know what movie it is. And what are you going to say about it, huh? Yes, it's Encanto. And Encanto is a tremendous film. I won't perseverate because so many people have seen this picture and they know why it's special. And it's not just because of the uplifting songs. It's not because of the gorgeous production design and the texturing modeling that they did on the characters that is just so many generations and leaps and bounds in detail beyond what we saw in Toy Story in 1995. Not that we're seeing just incredible musical performances or that the voiceover acting was done via remote. The entire sessions were done without a single person sharing the same space or air. It's possible that you can create a community around theater and possible to create a community around a project as special as Encanto is. And what makes it special is the people that were involved. The scriptwriters wrote something that is reverential for the community that they were trying to represent in Colombia. And watch the film carefully, look for the textures of the buildings, the fabrics that they use, the colored motifs that are throughout, the architectural details, they're all there. And Ben, this is really, to me, what makes the Pixar and Disney films elevate themselves to not just fodder for children, not just good movies, but works of art, because you can take practically any frame of Encanto, pick one, I don't care, at random, and put it on a wall in a frame, and it will be brilliant. Pretty much guaranteed. But then layer on top of that, the brilliant story elements, and I'll just focus on one, Luisa's story. That's brilliant. This is an opportunity for the audience members to identify with members of this family that they see through their own eyes, and then find out how they can rise above. And then add the story elements that make those characters lift up and apply that to your own life. And you can feel yourself rising up and literally coming out of the theater, or in my case, out of my couch, dancing, practically dancing down the stairs as this film is wrapping up the credits. It's just absolutely infectious. But dig a little deeper and you'll find a real substantial meaning in this film about family and self-worth. And it's the most important element has been touched on by others, so I won't get too crazy into it. But when you get into a story about a character that is visually depicted as always strong, always there to back up the family, yet you don't know what's going on right here and in here necessarily, because they're the quiet ones. And through this picture, through this grandiose visage, we see someone who needs a break, who needs some help and guidance and to be supported herself. Well, we don't get to see that very often. We don't get to see the ones that look strong, not be strong. And this was a chance for film to turn stereotypes on their ear and allow us to appreciate that. And to allow it to be a gateway to inclusivity is even a loftier goal, but it's certainly there. Those elements are absolutely there. And so that's why, and for many other reasons. And Kanto is my number one film of 2021.
Well, it may not have made my list, Gary, but as you probably have noted, I didn't put any animated films on my list. It is definitely my favorite animated film of 2021. It was just an absolute delight. I'll share my favorite moment in a non-spoilery way. I'll simply say my favorite moment, which led to my favorite song, is The Hug.
Okay, enough said.
Before we start wrapping things up, I did ask on Facebook and on Twitter what some of our followers' favorite movies were from 2021. I got a couple of responses here. I of course have to mention Sarah Moore, who is almost always on this show. Sarah's favorite film of 2021, which I didn't see at all, is Dune.
Okay.
Miles McGillivray, who was just on the show not too long ago, talking about, what were we talking about 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago? Oh, Lord of the Rings. We were talking about Lord of the Rings a few weeks ago. Miles picked No Way Home as his favorite movie to see in the theater, as I suspect several people probably are going to pick.
And
again, 500 million is yeah. And Miles also enjoyed watching Don't Look Up on Netflix.
Okay.
And my friend Adam Haig picked No Way Home, ShangChi, and also Ghostbusters Afterlife.
Glad somebody's in that camp.
So, lots of love for Spider-Man. Not a surprise. Not a surprise at all. But it's no longer 2021, Gary. We're now in 2022. We're, almost 1.5 months in.
Yep.
What are we looking forward to this year? We can talk about this as a whole. What films? What do we want to see from streaming services? What do we want to see?
What I want to see more of than anything else is films that are inclusive, that talk about and shine a light on situations that have long been subverted populations. I think the indigenous population of the United States deserves a bigger spotlight on it. I narrated a book about it last year that really opened my eyes. And there are films that are being made. Reservation Dogs as a series is also very well received and very well done. That gives us a glimpse a little bit into that res life. But there are also other populations that are underrepresented in film. And I think we need to continue the good work that has been started and greatly expand upon it so that underrepresented minorities can get proper representation in film. And we can take cues from women like Awkwafina, very strong presence and brilliant scriptwriter and comedian, but also a real palpable presence in animated films and the MCU, and she has her own series. Women like Lady Gaga, who are out there making feature films that are really tight and not just displaying their prowess as actresses, but also representing women in film and elevating their place as actresses. I would very much like to see films that we saw last year. Parasite, for example, winning Best Picture, would have been only in an international category. So I'd like to see the normalizing of foreign films or international films in more mainstream categories. I think that those non-English speaking films deserve representation in the other categories as well. I'll leave it at that.
Oh, I love that. I have long been a proponent of the idea that subtitles are your friend.
Yeah.
And if you still can't handle it, a dub is also your friend. I prefer watching a film in its original language with subtitles. I understand that not everyone is able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So if a film like Parasite can get for the love of God, get a good dub, please. But we do need to see it.
bucket load of really good international films that are going up for nominations. And while I don't have any immediate, Uni is one actually. It's on this list. The Worst Person in the World out of Norway is on my list. Red Post on Escher Street, Japanese film, another foreign film that is just, these are only pictures that you can see in the theaters that play pictures from the festivals, you know, and that's really also unfortunate, is that sometimes these pictures are nominated and they get released to video after the awards, and where they're going to get the most attention is before the awards. So I'd like to see most of these films before the Oscars, but I may not get to.
Yeah, it's always just a tough task trying to watch.
Yeah, you get to all of them or as close as you can.
Everything, yeah. I'll be very specific on what one of the things I want to see. Obviously, number one, I am so ready for Doctor Strange 2. Absolutely. But I really want to see what we talked about. I want to see films that debut on streaming services get their due on the big screen,
right?
Assuming that is the intention of the directors and of the artists making them. I want to see more women in the filmmaking process, starting at the very beginning in screenwriting, because without the screenplay, we don't go on to anything else. And we need to have more women and more representation at the writing level, because that's how we're going to get stories, the stories that you're talking about.
Yeah.
You know, it's really unfortunate that you know, the percentage of let's say the diversity is still, you know, we're 90% white men writing and directing.
Yeah. We've got a long way to go.
It's and this is something that has barely changed in, you know, the 100 years that filmmaking has been a thing. Like, it should have changed by now. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, agreed. 100%. And so we're in agreement on this score. Inclusivity in film in 2022 is where we would like things to go. And normalizing or maximizing exposure for these films that do represent the underrepresented, I think is the direction we should take. And the streamers are an advantage for that, because they do raise that star, right?
2 years ago, before the pandemic changed everything, before it changed everyone's film schedules, we were going to get Birds of Prey, Black Widow, Wonder Woman 1984, and Eternals were the 4 big superhero comic book projects that year. All 4 directed by women. It would be the first. Because the pandemic happened, we got Birds of Prey, and then Wonder Woman, you know, quietly sort of released on HBO at the end of the year.
Right.
So we got 2 films, 2 high-profile comic book films directed by women, but, you know, Eternals and Black Widow ended up getting thrown into a year that we also got ShangChi and SpiderMan. I would love to see that year. Oh, and the Suicide Squad on top of that. And Suicide Squad has kind of taken over the discourse in terms of the DC output, and the Batman is about to take over the discourse. We're about to lose the discourse for characters like Harley Quinn and Diana Prince, because, you know, everyone loves Batman. I would love to be able to have that year again, where we have, you know, several high-profile tentpole comic book projects directed by women, particularly with Birds of Prey and Eternals directed by women of color. I would love, I would love for the first time, and this isn't going to happen for a few years, not going to happen this year, but I would love the next James Bond movie to be the very first to be directed by a woman. 25 films, 60 years now, no women, and only 3 screenplays in the entire franchise have ever had
a woman
contributions, credited contributions to a woman. And one of them was No Time to Die. So
I'd like to take it one step further, because 2022 can represent representation, but wouldn't it be lovely if we don't have this conversation in a few years? Wouldn't it be lovely if you and I are still around and it's just, well, it's just normal. You have women in film just like you have men in film. That's the part that's baffling. Is like you said, why aren't we there yet? Why isn't this a thing?
And if you're out there screaming at the screen, yes, it's a rhetorical question. I do know why we're not there yet, because men.
Yeah, because man, because us.
Because of us,
girls.
yeah. So,
On that
and
note,
I want to see more vaccinations. I want to see us getting back to cinemas safer than we were last year, even though we tried to do a good job. We need to do a better job.
they now have the medication, at least in development, to be able to take it orally, which of course is far more convenient than going to a clinic and get a jab in your arm. Also less anxiety inducing for some. Whatever the reason,
Yeah.
it's for the end goal to be able to enjoy the products that we're buying. And it's such a huge part of American culture to go to the movies that culturally to be devoid of that for nearly 2 years, that can be among the things that kind of put the chinks in our armor. What makes it difficult to get through the day. Oh, I can't retreat and just go to the movies on Friday night. It makes me feel uncomfortable. There's a lot of people that need to mask up and vaccinate so that we can get that sense of the movies are just fun.
Yep. And on that dour note,
it's an up note. It is an up note. No, we need to do trivia too, though.
Yep. It's time for trivia. All right. So this is a 2021 specific question.
Oh boy, here we go.
All right. So, and at least you're the only one who can get it wrong this week, Gary. Or right. Who knows?
Well, you're going to get it right. That's not fair. All right. Lay it on me. Let's see how bad I do.
Before I ask, just an update on everything. So everyone got the SpiderMan trivia question correct, which means that Jalen and Travis extended their lead to 4. Gary, where are you at? You're on the board with 1 from last year.
Yeah.
Because we are carrying over last year's points.
Okay.
So you're not terribly far behind. So this week the question is, per Nielsen data, which of the following 2021 films that debuted exclusively to streaming services was the most watched of the year?
Exclusively.
Yes. So
okay, go ahead.
Was it A, The Mitchells versus the Machines, B, The Tomorrow War, C, Red Notice, or D, Luca?
D, Luca.
Well, Gary, we had such an interesting conversation about how upset we were that Luca was not in theaters. That actually did make it the most watched film on streaming services last year. I'll rephrase again, the most watched film to be released exclusively to
that was the operative word,
services.
Wasn't it? Exclusively. Yeah. Okay, Gary gets this one. All right.
That is our show for the week. Gary, do you have any final thoughts before we wrap things up?
Only that I think that we pounded it into the pavement effectively, but yeah, get back out into the theaters. Let's show the studios that the exhibitors are there and that the patrons are ready, and we need to be out and watching the movies.
But also keep in mind your health. Be safe as you're doing it.
So.
If you're feeling sick in any way, don't go to see a movie.
Stay home.
Just if you're not feeling safe about it, check Fandango. Check that seat availability. If you don't want to be in a packed theater with potentially a bunch of kids, check that seat availability. But yeah, we got coming up soon in movie theaters. We've got the Uncharted movie, and that's probably going to be one of the first sort of high-profile films of the year. Tom Holland's going to be in that. I mean, come on, everyone likes Tom Holland. So that, yeah, movies are back. Go see movies. Just do it safely. That is going to be it for episode 35. 2021, what a year. Please be better 2022.
Tip to the hat to 2022. Let it be there for us. See you in the movies.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Remember to check us out on Facebook, on Twitter, like, subscribe here on YouTube. I'm hoping to get some stuff on the blog. I'm trying to rank all 25 Bond films, so there's definitely stuff to check out everywhere. But then next week, we're going to be talking about Boba Fett. So until then, everyone, have an excellent day.